Welcome to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brianna Griffith, and here's what's going down in your backyard and across the world. We're going to kick off this episode with Union News with Ken Zarifis. Ken is the president of Education Austin, the Austin Teachers Union. So we're going to be talking about a couple different items affecting specifically AISD teachers, but yeah, broadly speaking, kind of the struggles around the teachers union as well. Thank you, Ken, for coming back on.
Brianna, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's get into this kind of first news item. This is from Clearview. There was a kind of article put out, 32 resignations from AISD's Special Education Department since August. So what exactly is it that's kind of going on here? Why have so many special ed teachers quit in such a short period?
That's a good question. If you ask the district, they'd say it's because they had new job opportunities or wanted to spend more time with their family, which is just a joke. The truth is they don't feel like they've been listened to. They don't feel like they've been respected, and they haven't been paid well. And so all those issues arise, and it was a speech pathologist that really stepped up and organized at the beginning of the year. We began to organize with them and work with them on how they could actually engage with the district and have a meeting to be able to talk about those issues and how they could actually overcome them, because they really wanted to problem solve. They were refused. They weren't allowed to have meetings. The district administration, the executive director wasn't meeting with them. The assistant director wasn't meeting with them. And it became very frustrating. And it's what we see too often. We see administration not respecting the workers that have the on-the-ground experience of how to resolve problems that may exist on a school campus or within a department.
Yeah. One of the things we were kind of talking about with regard to like how the administration handle these things, I think this is true across fields, but it's, I think, particularly prevalent in education, is that kind of the administration definitely kind of handles the relationship between them and the teachers that are kind of considered below them, quote unquote, below them, the same way that this kind of teacher-student model relationship works, where it's sort of this idea that like, I know all the things and you have to listen to me, and you have to kind of do what I say, and you know, if you don't understand why, well, that's just tough.
Wow. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's so true that it's a patriarchal system, and it's paternal in its approach, and that paternalism really gets infuriating for professionals that went to school for this work, that understand day to day what it takes to impact students' lives. And when the administrators and the supervisors and the principals don't listen to that and insist that they know what's best, when they make decisions that continually erode trust and engagement on our campuses, you got to know that they don't know what they're doing. That it really, what they've done is they've gone from an education system into a corporate model that says whoever's on top of you knows best. So what I've seen too often with administration in this situation is, you know, what they care most about that corporate ladder is that ass that's right above them. And they're more than happy to kiss that ass that's above them, but they don't care about the people below them or around them. And the priority is to get up the ladder. And that's not our priority. Our priority are kids and teachers and employees. And so you're spot on. They've got to get away from being paternal and be more collaborative and respect their peers.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of like that idea of kind of careerism as an upward path is something that I think would be very foreign to most teachers and to most workers in general. Like, you know, sort of, I guess I can speak for myself, but I can speak for most people I know, is that most people don't really want to find themselves kind of climbing a ladder toward more administrative positions. They want to be doing something fulfilling. They want to be doing something that they see as kind of socially worthwhile, especially within kind of a field like teaching. And they want to, but they also want to be sort of recognized as professionals. They want to be respected there. And so that idea that you basically need to crush the people below you in order to get to a higher position, I think is really just counterintuitive to the kind of work that most people want to do.
Wow. I mean, it is, because what we do is we're told, and we do it gladly, we meet kids where they're at, and we work from that point. That's what administrators should be doing with the workers on the campus. Meet people where they're at, get to understand them, and then work with them to work through problems or concerns. But people come in, they forget that we're human beings. Do this, just do it is a great slogan for selling shoes, but it does nothing for me in public education. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot to do it. And it takes a lot of people to impact a kid's life. So you're exactly right. It's how we collaborate and work together.
One of the things that this Clearview piece mentions is that essentially like each speech pathologist is carrying something like up to 70 cases at a time. Can you maybe elaborate on the kind of workload that people are facing, which is really, I think, causing as much as anything people to leave? And when you consider that all of the research shows, regardless of what part of education you're in, the smaller the class size, the kind of smaller your own workload, the better and more efficient for the students you're going to be. For special ed to be kind of this overburdened, I think speaks a lot.
Well, and the system wants to overburden people. The federal government, the state, and the local government just overwhelms our special ed teachers. And really, a decade ago, when the legislature cut $5.5 billion out of public ed, one of the things that was said over and over and over again is you've got to do more with less, do more with less. And we've heard that. You never do more with less. You do less with less. And that's a reality. More with less is just it's just not real. And so what happens is we don't have enough support. We don't have enough speech pathologists. We aren't paying speech pathologists enough to attract them into the district. Those who are in the district and love the district and want to stay here are then disrespected internally, which pushes them out, even though they were fighting against the economic struggles that they recognize because they loved working here and loved their students. But the pressure that's put on them and the disrespect then pushes them out. We have never dealt with this kind of exodus of professionals out of any category in the 10 years I've been running the union, that I've been president of this union. That's a huge problem. And when the district has a press conference that then minimizes why they left and that they're pursuing other interests, it's dishonest. Because that's not the truth. They're leaving because they're angry and they were mistreated.
Yeah, that doesn't even make sense as an excuse. Like people don't leave en masse anywhere just because they all of a sudden all of them decided that they want to spend more time with their family. It doesn't make sense.
No, it's not at all. It's an excuse for the district to feel good about itself and to present to the community that this is don't worry about that. Don't worry about the fire. Don't look behind the curtain. This is not happening. And it's just stuff we have to deal with on a daily basis, I guess. I
had a question actually from someone actually here at Co-op Radio. I guess a while back, Texas schools had been kind of revealed or at some level to be keeping the rate of kind of special ed students within the special ed programs down.
That's right.
Which when you think about it, you can't control the number of students who have special learning needs. So to have this kind of keeping the rates down basically means it's encouraging schools across the state of Texas to not meet the needs of all of their students explicitly.
That's exactly right. And the federal government came down on Texas because of it, said because a false 8.5% cap was put on special ed numbers. You couldn't go above 8.5% of your population. Well, that's just ludicrous. That doesn't account for the differences between campuses, the differences between districts, and it completely ignores the students' needs. The priority for that system is our numbers and economics. That economics and economic systems tend to disrespect those with the greatest needs. And in our system, we see it so acutely because of its capitalistic nature, because people make money on this. What we see is that cap came off this year. So there's a flood of people needing to get tested, and there are people coming from out of the district that also are coming into AISD that haven't been identified that need to be tested. So testing needs to occur. They're contracting out LSS or the LSSPs who do the testing and the diagnosticians. And what we've done is we have created a system that has no capacity to deal with the needs that we see this year. We don't have principals encouraging teachers in a way that will encourage them to make sure that students are getting tested, to make sure their needs are getting met. Now, that said, we have made a practice statewide and nationally of over-identifying black and brown kids for special ed services. That all speaks to the fact that we need to take our time. We need to have a thorough type of assessment. We need to make sure the assessment, it does not have implicit bias against black and brown kids. And we need to look at their assets so that we make sure that we're identifying the right kids for services. When you starve a system, you don't have the people to perform it, it runs awry and the kids suffer.
I'd like to kind of turn to a story that in a weird way is kind of related, and that is an article from The Statesman that was titled "Delays Racking Up Costs at New $56 Million Austin ISD Headquarters."
Oh my God.
So on the one hand, what you're talking about is this kind of a critical, this supposed critical shortage of funding when it comes to actually providing teachers, providing the people doing the work for the money that winds up hurting not just the teachers, but also the students. So like there's no real money for the teachers and for the well-being of students, but all of a sudden you see on this other hand that not only is this way over schedule, but we're also talking about millions of dollars over budget as well. That doesn't seem to be an issue.
It's amazing. I've come to understand the district doesn't have money until it wants to have money. They wanted this new building, so they did it. They sold their last property for approximately $30 million. They purchased the new property on South I-35 Southfield for about $30 million. Now it's costing $56 million, and they knew that with $2 million of that being overruns already, and it's not even done. So there'll be more overruns. And as I stand in this building, and as I'm looking out over the city, it speaks, I believe, to a level of hubris by the district to say, we are watching out over you. It goes back to that paternalistic attitude that I think is so damaging to our district. And there's so many things that we could do with $30 million that could have been better for kids, for programs, for teachers, for raises, for a number of things that were ignored. We had facilities that the district continually said are underoccupied, that we need to sell them. Well, how about turning those into district offices? How about using the properties you already have instead of buying a $30 million behemoth, except for the fact that you want to own Austin property and a big castle on the hill?
And given this real estate market, given what things cost in Austin right now, for people to be throwing money at real estate right now, I mean, I can almost it's absurd. Don't
even get me going. Yeah. AISD is the largest. They own more real estate than anybody in the city. They're doing fine. This didn't have to happen like this. And we should be thinking about our kids and the equity of our children and their family much more before we think about a $60 million building.
Without a doubt. So in our last minute, I believe that Education Austin is also entering into kind of budget negotiations at the moment. Is there anything you'd like to hit upon as far as the way you're hoping that plays out?
Well, yeah, we hope it plays out well for workers. We know there's a lot of needs within special ed. There's issues with the dual language and programming, but we can't forget the workers, because Education Austin represents teachers, custodians, bus drivers, school workers, and we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be able to live in this city. And so we want to make sure that everybody across board gets paid, and that last year was not an anomaly, but the beginning of a pattern of how we address compensation in this district.
As the price of living rises so much here in Austin, and I mean really across the country, wherever it is you're listening to this show, the price of living is rising, the price of rent is rising, the pay needs to rise as well. And I think what we've seen over and over again is the way that happens is through that union struggle. When people are able to kind of enter into a strong position of collective bargaining, that is how pay rises, and that's an absolute necessity.
All boats rise. It's absolutely how it works.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to leave it there. We were joined by Ken Zarifis, who's the president of Education Austin. You are listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 FM Austin and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. Stay tuned. Now let's turn to environmental justice with Marissa Rodriguez, where we talk about the latest environmental news and how it connects to race, class, and economics, and so much more. Marissa, of course, is an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, based in Dallas-Fort Worth. Thank you, Marissa, very much for coming on once again.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
So I'd like to talk once again. I feel like on this show, whenever environmental justice issues come up, so much of it does tend to revolve around Houston because of its large, essentially, deregulation around kind of zoning and whatnot, so that often buildings of much different types are put together so that there's very little regulation. For instance, stopping different chemical refineries, oil refineries, warehouses and whatnot from being built in different working class, especially working class neighborhoods and black and brown neighborhoods. So this has once again led to an explosion where it appears people have been killed by this. In what I can only see as another issue really of environmental injustice because of these lack of any regulation whatsoever. This happened on January 24th. Can you give us the rundown of kind of what this Houston explosion was all about?
Yeah, so it appears that there was a factory explosion which killed 2 people, unfortunately. And so this, of course, as you mentioned and as you hinted at, is the result of just deregulation and just an absolute failure of the Texas Environmental Commission to actually enforce any sort of regulations at all. We were speaking a little bit off air about this, and it's unfortunate that we have to kind of comment, constantly about the Houston explosion, which could literally refer to like hundreds of incidences, right? So like going back years and years. So it's in this particular instance, unfortunately, was yet another instance of a chemical fire and explosion that happened that impacted people for up to half a mile outside of the blast radius. People's homes were being destroyed. Debris was being carried through. Some businesses were impacted. So this is not a small thing that happens. I mean, an explosion is literally an explosion. And so, the fallout of this, there's always kind of questions about what chemicals are being released into the environment. The common sort of reply of the companies who are at fault in these instances is, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. But how many, not a big deals have to happen before it becomes a big deal? So it's January 24th is yet another instance of environmental impact happening in our Gulf here in Texas, impacting not only the water, but the air and, of course, the soil. So, yet another instance of environmental injustice in Texas.
Yeah, this happens so often in Houston, largely because Houston is the area where essentially oil is refined and sent to port. It's exported, it's imported from Houston. But yeah, there's so little regulation often around reporting as well. I know one of the organizations on the ground in Houston that has tried very hard to kind of get to the bottom of what at any given time is going into the air, is going into the water, et cetera, that really tries hard to make sure this is public knowledge, that people know what sort of threat they're facing. There's an organization out there called Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, or TEJAS, that has done a lot of education about that. That's really doing the kind of necessary research. But it's interesting that this is having to come from this. I believe it's officially a nonprofit. It's having to come from this kind of an essentially private organization rather than from any of the government agencies that should be really doing the kind of research and doing the kind of education. Often it's the government agencies in this case that are actually downplaying the emergency, or that are not telling everybody kind of the true story. These just keep happening over and over again. And if it weren't for kind of the work of so many activists and advocates for this information, so much of it would just be completely buried. So much of it we would just not hear about because it is considered absolutely normal, even though there are a lot of communities in Houston with such high cancer rates that we're just expected to believe is completely normal.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and it should be emphasized that this is, of course, not normal. This is not okay. It's not acceptable. And you're right. If it weren't for the work of activists and nonprofits constantly doing this kind of research and analyzing the data that is put out, the Texas Environmental I believe it's the TCEQ, the Texas Commission for the Environmental Quality. They really act as though this is not their concern, which is exactly should be their concern. And the lives of citizens, of people living in Houston and Beaumont, which are, I believe, number one and number two for sort of infractions and regulatory practices that are deregulatory, rather. These places are under constant attack, essentially, because there is no environmental agency that is government or state sanctioned that's actually protecting these people. So it begins to look like an attack on people of color, on working people who live in that area. Because how else are we supposed to understand these events if you have constant explosions and constant people as in corporations breaking rules, and there is no justice. There is nobody there to tell them that they essentially get slaps on the wrists, right? So I have a little bit of data that shows that from 2017, there's a report that was compiled again by an advocacy group. This work is not being done by the state, showing that 4,590 reported unauthorized emission events. I'm sorry, I misspoke. This is 2018. And the TCEQ actually imposed penalties on only 57 of these events. That's literally 1% of almost 4,600 events that happened. And these are dangerous chemicals that are being released into the atmosphere, as I said earlier, into the water, into the air, into the soil. And yet almost nothing comes of it when we're talking about the state and the state of Texas and the government.
And it's systemically set up to basically not actually punish any of these companies. And usually, you said some 50 out of some 4,000 basically of these incidents where essentially like some sort of chemical was released, some sort of emission happened. Of the 4,000 incidents of this, only 50 of them were actually fined. And when you look at the actual fines on these things, very often the fine is sort of a factor of kind of 1,000 times less. So for instance, if whatever it is, if the environmental catastrophe caused by this corporation causes billions of dollars worth of damage, they might get fined millions of dollars. If it causes millions of dollars worth of damage, they might get fined thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So it's always a magnitude less what the fine is as opposed to the actual incident, so that they always essentially wind up making the money. So that essentially it doesn't actually affect the ability of any of these corporations to do business, which I feel like what this is really all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What you said is basically hitting the nail on the head. There is nothing to come of this as far as accountability, as far as justice is concerned. People suffer, and corporations are allowed to continue to operate as usual, essentially with no real consequence. And this is the result of deregulation. This is the result of an environmental catastrophe brought on by corporations being held in higher esteem, essentially, than human beings. So that is the clear delineation of people under profit. So it should be people over profits, right? We want to advocate for a reality and an existence where corporations are actually held liable for these environmental attacks on working people and on the environment itself. We talked a little bit earlier about the cancer rates in the 5th Ward in Houston. I think the number is 46%. I mean, how can you ignore this kind of information? These people are dying. And that's exactly the sort of thing that, that we should be, an ideal situation with the government would be a just society where people are not allowed to die just simply because of where they live, because they live too close to an oil refinery, because they live too close to a plant or what have you. Like there should be no reason why a place where a person lives is impacting their health to the degree that they and their neighbors are dying. That's the textbook definition of injustice, and it needs to stop.
And of course, it's race and it's class based. Just to use an Austin example, if the kind of rich people of Westlake, for instance, if the kind of rich white people, the rich white neighborhoods were dying, if they had a 46% rate of cancer, you can be damn sure the entire resources of the city and the state would be mobilized on that immediately to figure out what it is that's wrong. But because working class people, especially working class Black and brown people, are seen as disposable, they either have to be within this system that grinds people up. They either are disposed of here or they're disposed of kind of on the battlefields. That's the one way that working class people are often kind of quote unquote made useful to this kind of capitalist machine that grinds people up, is they're made useful by being sent off to battlefields essentially to provide the supply side of this oil and of these kind of minerals that are then kind of refined and whatnot. I bring that up because one of the other things we want to talk about in the brief time we have is that sort of impact of the Pentagon as a essentially force for environmental catastrophe. So I'm wondering if you want to kind of pick up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just thinking about healthcare access, that's another kind of inroad into this discussion about people, working class people and people of color, especially, being used as essentially the term that gets thrown around a lot as cannon fodder, because it's absolutely, a good metaphor, unfortunately, for how people are treated by the war machine. So if people want access to healthcare, one of the ways that they can actually guarantee that they might have access to healthcare is by joining the military. And these recruiters, they show up at these high schools and they want to influence the impressionable minds of young people and basically sell them lies about all the benefits that come along with joining the military. And of course, every bomb that's dropped, depleted uranium, last I checked, is not good for the environment. Pretty sure it's not good for the health of human lives. And it's not good for animals. It's not good for trees. It's not good for water. So bombs being dropped overseas by brown people here who were recruited simply because they look around their environment, somebody from Beaumont, somebody from Houston, somebody from anywhere, USA, looks around at their environment and thinks, I need to do better. I need to improve my station. So how could I do that? One way is by joining the military, or so they're told. And of course, this is the mechanism of the war machine, is by recruiting some of the most impoverished people in this country to join and to just be basically chewed up and spit out. And it's a damn shame. And we must organize. We must make these links between the environmental movement, between the anti-imperialist, anti-war movement, and show working people how they can resist, how they can basically put a stop to this machine and not be a cog in it.
That understanding is absolutely crucial. And that connection, I think, between these different movements, the movement for more labor rights and better wages, the movement for environmentalism, and the movement for racial justice, all of these things are absolutely connected, so that you can't really have one without the other. You can't really sort of end, I think, the wars in many ways. You can't end the U.S. kind of wars abroad without also talking about, well, like, how do we get healthcare and vice versa? So I think that is an absolutely crucial point. So yeah, I think we have to wrap it up there. If you have kind of any last thoughts in our last 20 seconds or so, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to encourage people to continue to ask questions, continue to find the links between these different, seemingly different points of, environmental justice, healthcare justice, education, all of these different things, which seem separate, but are actually connected. To continue to seek, join organizations, do your homework, and fight the good fight. Fight against the war machine and fight against anti-environmental action.
Absolutely. So we're going to leave it there. We were joined by Marissa Rodriguez, who's an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation based in Dallas, Fort Worth. Thank you very much, Marissa, for coming on once again.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 in Austin, Texas, and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. Stay tuned. And now it is once again time for our monthly segment, Tech for the People with Chris Garaffa. We talk about the latest tech news from a working class perspective. And Chris, of course, is a technologist based in New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you very much, Chris, for returning to the show once again.
So happy to be back on. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, there's so much really important stuff I'd like to get into here. The first of which, and the kind of most current, I think, of which is this everything that happened with regard to the caucus app within Iowa. Why is this an issue? And do you think the Democratic Party is really taking steps to stop this?
Well, I think the Democratic Party is certainly taking steps to stop something, but that something is the rise of Bernie Sanders, who, by all accounts, is the only candidate who on the Democratic slate that can actually beat Trump this year. I don't think the Democratic Party is actually taking voting very seriously. Neither does the entire political system doesn't. But, we heard a lot about this app when, there was this disaster in Iowa on the 4th, and it took days and days to get information out. It was very hard to see who actually won the Iowa caucus. And one of the things that we found out was they were using an app created by a company called Shadow. I mean, first of all, if you're going to have an election-related company, Shadow should not be the name of it, on principle alone, just for the optics there. But this company, Shadow, created this app that apparently was having trouble reporting maybe incorrect results or something like that. And the app correctly got a lot of attention. And then we got some great reporting from Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone Project about who was behind this app, specifically Reid Hoffman, a Silicon Valley, billionaire, and who has serious ties to the Democratic Party. Also, he's the guy who started LinkedIn, by the way. That's how you might know him. There were many partnerships with the Democratic Party and the company, the investment arm acronym behind Shadow Inc. I just do want to say, one of the things that we've heard a lot floating around both the left and the right is that the app itself was changing votes, and I want to be very cautious when we talk about that. It's very easy to say this was specifically this app that was programmed to change numbers and do all these things, and I fully understand why people say that. Being a developer myself, though, being a technologist and building and taking apart systems that work at scale, it's not easy to build these things. And from what we know about how this app was built in just a few months before the Iowa caucus, it's very possible it just wasn't tested properly. So I don't want to blame this app specifically, and I think it actually obfuscates the real issue here. The real issue being that we don't have democratic, clear oversight and transparency in our electoral process. We need to have actually, open source voting machines. Open source meaning that anyone can go and see the code behind the application or even the physical machine that you're using to vote. That would allow security experts to actually go through and audit that stuff and see, hey, this has a vulnerability or this is safe, this is good, and do that. And, we need that on a federal level. We need it at state and local levels as well.
part of this, I think, also though gets to sort of what the Democratic Party is, how the Democratic Party functions, is they don't really, in some level, seem to believe that they have to, I think, function democratically. Yeah, some of the people who have been kind of promoted to voter protection experts or whatnot have been, or the people who are funding, for instance, the app were, for instance, the Pete Buttigieg campaign. The absolute lack of kind of transparency, the absolute any sort of lack of forward facing knowledge of kind of who was behind this app and why it was built, really just shows, I think, that the Democratic Party is not interested in this at all. But then another part of this to me is I wonder why all of this couldn't be done. I mean, not to necessarily promote Google products per se, but I'm thinking, I feel like I could have designed a reporting system entirely within Google Drive with a Google form in a couple hours that would register all of the things that this app would have supposedly needed to register, that could have done all the formulas and whatnot. Maybe I'm missing something, but it just seems like the need to design an app here was almost entirely superfluous.
They very much could have needed an app or thought that an app was the best solution. I think it's more likely that somebody sold them an app. This company sold them a promise and got a bunch of money for it. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party itself, like the Republican Party, is a private institution, right? They actually are not really, outside of the SEC, the FEC, Federal Election Commission. They don't have a lot of oversight. Through the government, they can decide how they want to do their own conventions, how they want to do their own voting processes, which is completely hypocritical because we're constantly told that there are only two parties in the United States. Now, we know that there are many, many parties. There are many candidates for president outside of the Democratic and Republican parties, and they are not given a chance to even be on stage or have their voices heard. But even if you take the assumption that the Democrats and the Republicans are the only two parties that people care about, and again, I disagree with that assumption, but even if you take it at face value, we should have transparency in the electoral processes that these two parties have. And we have absolutely none. There should be federal oversight and federal regulations for protecting election systems from malicious, but also just incompetence as well, from mistakes as well as attacks. The Democrats love to cry Russia, 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 but they can't even invest in an app that that can deliver some results to a server. Look, could we have done this in Google Forms? I don't know. Give me about $100,000 and I'll tell you, because that's about the going rate for something like this. It's, again, we don't know what the app what the app actually was doing, what the app, what the servers looked like, the infrastructure, and that's the first thing that I thought when I heard about an app just completely trashing the Iowa caucus, is what was behind this app in terms of the infrastructure. I think Max Blumenthal's reporting is extremely important in terms of exposing who is behind the money in this situation. And the other thing I have to say, too, outside of the realm of technology, is that just the very right to vote itself is actually under attack. So, if you have to have a voter ID, should be considered a poll tax. If they're closing DMVs in your area and it's going to take you a half day to get via public transit to the DMV where you can get an updated license so that you can then go to the polls or you can register to vote, that should be the first thing that people are concerned about. And this is actually what's happening, especially in the Black Belt counties in the South. So we have attacks on voting coming from all over the place. And the last one I'm concerned about is Russia.
Oh, yeah, absolutely right. And I want to hit on one more point before we kind of move on, which is that as you were talking about, the Democratic Party sort of postures itself as like this party that's open to the public, that everything that's supposedly legitimate has to go through either the Republican or the Democratic Party if it's truly kind of electorally, acceptable. Third parties are just completely demonized within this. If you vote third party, you're accused of throwing it to the Republicans or whatnot. So the Democrats have set themselves up to be the only legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate game in town. They say, if you want to do anything, make any sort of change, you have to go through us. So they've set up the expectation that people have that they're like a publicly accessible, just a publicly accessible party. And then with something like the Iowa caucuses, you see exactly the opposite, that they are in fact a private entity that can do whatever it is they want with their own votes. They can run their own system into the ground. And it's like, they really, I think, want to have it both ways. They want to create the appearance of a kind of big tent that anyone can be involved in. But then when push comes to shove, they will make sure that, Bernie Sanders, who got thousands more votes, who also should have tied with the number of delegates based on kind of the early polling numbers, they will make sure that he gets less delegates, that his thousands more votes don't count for anything, and that this weird number, the state delegate equivalent, which is just this kind of this algorithm, this kind of weird math equation, doesn't count for anything at all. But that somehow they throw that to kind of this otherwise what would have been a pretty obscure candidate, Pete Buttigieg. So yeah, they want to have it both ways for sure. Any last thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, look, I'm not a Democrat, certainly not a Republican. I'm a socialist. I am an independent of the two parties. But I think what the Democratic Party is doing to Bernie Sanders is outrageous. This movement behind Sanders is huge. I celebrate it. I think it is fantastic. And, just like 2016, the DNC is going to do everything it can to make sure that Bernie Sanders is not in the White House. They don't care as much about Donald Trump as they do about Bernie Sanders. And we saw that play out in 2016. We're seeing it play out again. And again, outside the realm of technology, I still think we need to be paying close attention to what the DNC, its affiliates in this, its CNN and MSNBC are doing, and just don't fall for these nonsense stories, about the Pete, the rise of Pete, or the fact that it's just, an app. This is an entire system that actually needs to be taken on.
Yeah, and the Gray Zone has done so much good reporting on all of this at you can just find the Gray Zone, Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton, wonderful journalists there. So let's move on to the next story, which is that Joshua Shulte, I believe his name is, or Shulte, is on trial for the leak of Vault 7. First of all, what is Vault 7? Who is this guy, and sort of what this trial is about, and what your take on it is?
Yeah, so we actually got a couple of CIA stories today, and I'm fully expecting that white van to pull down my street any moment now. CIA lost a bunch of its cyber warfare tools in 2017, late 2016, early 2017. And once they realized it was lost, they kind of scrambled. Well, somebody then also leaked information about these tools, not the tools themselves, but information about these tools, the manuals, so to say, to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks called them Vault 7, and that was published beginning on March 7th of 2017. I remember it well. I was reading about these, and it was just shocking to see, even as somebody who, is very entrenched in the security community and knows that, what the NSA and CIA and other three-letter agencies do, it was shocking to see the extent and the money that they have put into these tools. So Vault 7 was published in about 24 parts by WikiLeaks, and many of them very technical. But what it came down to was that the leaks basically show what the CIA is doing to be able to attack your phone, your computer, your networking equipment, in some cases your smart TV. And in some cases, even your car, all of these devices now connected to the internet, connected to our Wi-Fi networks or cellular networks or what have you, they can all be addressed online. And so the CIA put millions, potentially billions of dollars into developing tools to attack. We start out with, your iPhone or Android phone, your Mac or Windows computer. But then they also were talking about, you think everyone has or we hope everyone has, antivirus software on their computer, but they have an entire part called Grasshopper that they basically built persistent payloads to get around Microsoft Security Essentials and other antivirus software. So they were actually saying we need to make sure that we are never caught by antivirus software. They also have something called Weeping Angel, which exploited smart TVs. It had to be installed with a USB stick. But then it could actually take over the microphone and video camera on the TV, even when the TV appeared to be off. Think about it. Your TV is probably plugged into the wall 24 hours a day. But even if it was plugged in, even if it was turned off, they could still be using the video camera and microphone on it. This goes so much deeper. There's so much stuff in here that people should be aware of.
Within popular media and within a kind of popular culture since the 1960s, there's been this kind of archetype, this stereotype within media of the kind of crazy CIA conspiracy guy, the guy who is just an absolute quote unquote whack job or nutcase. This guy who just believes everything that the CIA is doing this, and this. And, I think to a large degree that was kind of propagated by, I think, reactionary media to sort of, discredit not as sort of like a conspiracy, but just like the way things enter popular culture is often in this reactionary form of like sort of discrediting in many ways very real concerns about the level of control the CIA has and the fact that the CIA has really not been checked at any point in its history. The last point at which the CIA was called out for anything, largely the last point at which the CIA actually had to face any sort of repercussions was the late 1970s or so, the church hearings. Since then, they've largely still operated with complete impunity. They were discovered as having the kind of torture program of the Bush years. John Kiriakou revealed that. They've got this kind of Vault 7 thing, and yet they continue sort of chugging along, I think, without any sort of real repercussions, where you can see here that with the Vault 7 thing that they absolutely just have truly scary access to every kind of level of electronic device. I mean, not every level per se, but large swaths of kind of personal consumer electronic devices, the sort of things that I think are kind of run through the popular imagination in sort of like these dystopian novels of what a like technocratic surveillance state would look like. I mean, those are things that, by all accounts, by sort of these revelations, appear to be happening at this very moment.
Yeah, so many of us, we're called conspiracy theorists or whatnot, and then the entire world woke up one day in 2012, and whoa, all of a sudden there's Edward Snowden's NSA revelations that came out, in part through The Guardian, through Glenn Greenwald, who has recently been under attack in Brazil, although those charges have since been dropped, but that's a whole other some story to take up sometime. Yeah, I mean, really, Ed Snowden really showed us what the NSA itself was capable of. These leaks from the CIA showed us what the CIA is capable of. I think it's very difficult to call somebody who thinks that, the government is watching or has the capability to be watching all the time. It's tough to call us conspiracy theorists at this point because it's more just reality. The real conspiracy is actually against the people of the world by the U.S. government and the, shadowy or even public agencies that put this stuff out. And we have to remember too, the CIA immediately went on the defensive and said, oh, you know what, WikiLeaks is the criminal here and should not have published this, and this was this is a criminal act to publish this information. Except the CIA also acknowledged later that they had lost control of the actual tools, not just the documentation for them, but the actual tools themselves, that somebody had stolen them, and those never popped up on the open internet. You can't just search for those like you can search for the Vault 7 documentation. So the CIA we need to talk about how they develop these tools. So if they're trying to get into your iPhone or your TV or whatever it is, they have to find what's called a vulnerability. They have to find a bug in the software that lets them gain access and then gain more and more privileges in that system. Normally, when a researcher finds these kinds of issues in a system, they reach out to the vendor, let's say Apple in this case, for an iPhone, and they say, hey, Apple, I found this bug. Here's how I found it. Here's how it affects things. Here's all the information you need. You've got 90 days to fix this until I go public with it. And then the vendor does the right thing, and they issue a software update. And that's why I always tell people it's a pain, but when you get that software update pop up, go run it. Take the 10 minutes to run that software update. And then hopefully that issue is patched and no one can use that bug anymore to attack the phone and gain access to it. So the CIA skips that step of telling the vendor about it. The NSA is very similar, by the way. They skip the step of being responsible and telling the vendor about it. Instead, they just go ahead and write tools to take advantage of those bugs. And so now they can actually use those bugs to get into the iPhone, the computer, whatever it is. It might be that some other researcher finds the issue and the manufacturer patches it and fixes it up. It might be that it's never found and the CIA can hold on to it forever. If another, bad actor, some hacker group or something finds that bug, they're also not going to, announce it to Apple or to Microsoft or anyone. They're going to hold on to it. So then there's the fact that the CIA could be held, should be held liable for the fact that it knew about these things and did nothing to address them, which could potentially cause people to lose data, to lose money if they're, if they get hit by one of those bots that encrypts all your files and demands Bitcoin payments for it. And that doesn't happen just to individuals. It happens actually, to school districts and hospitals and, and so many other institutions. So the CIA is holding on to information that could actually help us to protect ourselves, but they're using it to attack targets all around the world.
And as I believe you just mentioned, they said they've lost control of this. So that means is within other people's hands. That means that whether state or non-state actors, whoever it is who might have picked up on this is no longer, not that it would be safer per se just within the CIA's hands, but like essentially, as with so many of these developments within, whether it's the security state, whether it's nuclear weapons, whether it's other types of weaponry or whatnot, the U.S. develops something thinking they're going to have this absolute superiority over it, and then very quickly, whether other countries or other non-state actors or whatever the case is, I hate to use the term non-state actors because it's been so demonized against WikiLeaks rather, which I've now said twice. But yeah, it's like basically the CIA, from my understanding, like having lost control of these things has just kind of contributed to a more chaotic world, a world I think with less stability in their kind of pursuit of ultimate order.
Absolutely. And we, speaking of, chaotic world, one of the things in this dump was called the Marble Framework. And what the Marble Framework did is it provided a way for the CIA to insert foreign language text, maybe Arabic, Persian, Chinese, Russian, Korean, into its malware, its viruses and Trojans and its hacking, so that it would be harder to track it back to the CIA itself and instead would be falsely attributed. So think about these languages again. Persian, Arabic, Korean, Russian, Chinese. These match up perfectly with the DPRK, Iran, Russia, China, and any any one of the countries in the Middle East, in the Arab world that is the target of the U.S. Either by standard military weapons or by cyber weapons. So they were actually redirecting attention from themselves, in order to make it look like maybe an attack came from North Korea or Iran.
Or possibly, just really going out on a limb here, perhaps someone could make a leak look like it was perhaps a Russian hack. I know that's that's a real shot in the dark there, but that's certainly within the realm of possibility. So yeah, if you want to either kind of offer any last thoughts on that, or we can also move to the next story, which is another related story about the CIA. This actually broke as we were speaking. We are talking on February 11th. We were pre-recording this, and so as we were kind of speaking, as we were preparing for the segment, the Washington Post released an article, a couple different headlines appearing for it, but the headline I've got is, "For decades, the CIA read the encrypted communications of allies and adversaries." What's the sort of rundown on this?
Yeah, there was a company, doesn't exist anymore, went out of business in 2018, but it was called Crypto AG. It was based out of Switzerland, and it started out making devices similar to the Enigma device that the German military, the Nazi military, used in World War II. And it sort of made encryption devices, private secret communication devices, but also the tools to crack them. As technology advanced, so did Crypto AG's products. And according to the Washington Post, they had 120 countries listed as their clients, including Iran, India, Pakistan. The Vatican was apparently a client of theirs as well. And what we've just learned just today is that Crypto AG was owned by the CIA. So you have all of these countries use some allies and some not allies of the United States using a CIA product for cryptography. What that opens up is the possibility, and what the Washington Post lays out is the reality that the CIA knew exactly how to crack the cryptography that Crypto AG was using. So cracking the cryptography, what does that mean? That means that the CIA had a secret key to get into the messages or whatever data was going through the machines that Crypto AG was using, that companies or countries relying on Crypto AG products were using. According to this, they were able to monitor Iran during the 1979 hostage crisis. They gave information to Britain during the Falklands War because they were monitoring Argentina's military, and so many other examples here in this. And there were suspicions. I had read in the past about Crypto AG. There were some suspicions that it had relations to the CIA. We now have definite proof through these documents, and I think historians are going to be going through them for some time now, about how Crypto AG was actually completely funded and backed by the CIA. It's important to note, by the way, that they never got these products into the Soviet Union and China in the 60s or 70s, which is probably what they sort of wanted to do, but that never actually happened.
The USSR and China, which was naturally distrustful of so much. I mean, having been attacked repeatedly, both countries having been attacked repeatedly by the U.S. and having been spied on by the U.S., they had this distrust of this kind of technology, and that actually turned out to be entirely founded in a fear of a thing that was actually a threat. And I think it just absolutely justifies the rationale of these countries for being distrustful of this communication technology. And
this is why it's so important to watch that, countries like Iran and China and the DPRK and Cuba today, and even the Soviet Union when it existed, were building their own independent computing systems. They, so the DPRK has its own version of the Android operating system, the system that runs, your Android phone, whether it's from Google or somebody else. China is building its own versions of the Linux operating system. Cuba just recently announced its own cloud system. Everything's in the cloud. Well, Cuba's going to have its own now. The Soviet Union was doing fantastic research into building its own types of computers that, weren't anything like what we have, even what was in the West in the 60s and 70s. And they had to do this because, first of all, if you can't, there's embargoes against getting certain products from the U.S. or the West. And second of all, they knew they couldn't trust Western technology exactly for reasons like this.
We can move into, kind of an update to a story we've previously covered, which is around Clearview AI.
There's so much wrong with Clearview. As you said, it goes through Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, the whole internet, and pulls photos down and tries to, identify the profile associated with them. And then they've partnered with over 600 police departments that we know of, so that the police can just drop a photo that they've taken in and get your name and potentially, your Facebook account, or your Twitter account, from there, who your friends and contacts are, what you're talking about publicly, all just from taking a picture of you. Now, I go to a lot of, anti-war demonstrations and, anti-racist actions, and I don't want the police here being able to do that. I mean, the police here know who I am at this point, but, I certainly don't want the police anywhere just be randomly taking pictures of people and, figuring out who they are and then going to look at their Facebook profiles. Clearview basically said, go wild. They actually said, feel free to run wild with your searches. And they did that to the city of Green Bay, Wisconsin. All Green Bay had to do is pay a $3,000 license. That's practically, nothing for a police department, especially in the age of militarized police, being willing to spend anything on weapons. This is a cyber weapon. This is a huge, huge intrusion into our right to privacy, to have this private company collecting all this data and then just handing it over to police to do whatever they want with it with no oversight.
We were joined for this segment by Chris Garaffa, who is a technologist based in New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming back on the show once again. That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates in Austin, Texas, and is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. We are out of here.